Daniel Park was a fat, disgusting loner who was tortured by all of his classmates for being the ugliest pig in school, until one day he woke up with a perfect body and had gotten the hottest face and rock-hard abs. Before he knew it, he had become the hottest guy in school and used his BTS-like charm to blow every girl's plot armor off. However, before Daniel became that handsome idol, he spent his days as the slave of his ruthless bully, Taesong. On a random day, Daniel groveled on the bathroom floor while Taesong and his crew were getting turned up from smoking cheap cancer sticks. They hated him because he was short and overweight, so they called him a pig and commanded him to dance around like a circus animal. However, no matter what Daniel did, he could never satisfy the bullies, and they always ended up punching his face into a pulp. Back at home, Daniel took his anger out on his mom, telling her that she was the reason he became so fat and miserable. He tried asking her if he could transfer to another school, but she told him that they couldn't afford it, and that he would lose touch with all of his classmates. But after years of being treated like garbage, he slammed his fists into the kitchen wall and ran off into his room. The next day at school, Daniel stood in fear as Taesong and his friends placed bets on who would hit him the hardest. One of the guys, a professional soccer player, shot the ball right in Daniel's face and it knocked him straight to the ground. Taesong was furious with Daniel for letting him win, so he punched him deep in the gut, knocking the air out of his lungs, and picked him up to hit him a second time. But Daniel's mom arrived and tried forcing him to let go. As she lashed out at Taesong for hurting her son, Daniel felt embarrassed by the whole scene, so he screamed at her, telling her to get lost. When he got back home, Daniel felt bad for his outburst at school, and he apologized to his mom when he returned home. After finally understanding the extent of how badly he was bullied, she forgave him and promised that she would transfer him to another school. However, his mother said that she couldn't tag along with him because of her new job, but she swore to do her best as a mother to support him. Those words made Daniel cry, and he made an inner promise to do better and provide for his mom in the future. He arrived at the location of his new apartment, and he was excited for the opportunity to start a new journey. Daniel went into the city in search of something to eat, and while he couldn't help but marvel at the various sights along the way, he accidentally bumped into a hot girl on the street, Mai Jin. Her boyfriend, Jin Seong, came along, and they were about to leave when Daniel flashed his awkward smile. Her boyfriend was convinced that Daniel was a lonely loser who was after his girl, so he challenged him to a street fight. And Daniel was determined to stand up for himself in this new city, so he clenched his fists and got ready to fight. But before he could make a move, Jin Seong landed a hard blow on his face, throwing him to the ground. As Daniel tried to get up and run, Jin Seong grabbed his hair and punched him harder a second time. While people stopped and took pictures of how badly he was getting beaten, he kept on going, even after Mai Jin begged him, until Daniel became unconscious and wiped out from all the beating. With no more dignity left, Daniel returned to his apartment and cried his eyes out after seeing the post of his beatdown on the internet. He wondered why he was born with such bad luck and began to doubt whether his life would ever get better, even in the new city. In the middle of the night, Daniel woke up and immediately felt like he was standing on a higher ground. After stumbling into the bathroom, he looked at himself in the mirror, but was shocked at the reflection that he got in return. Somehow, in the course of his sleep, his spirit was transferred into the body of a tall and handsome demigod. However, his original body was still sleeping on the bedroom floor, and when he tried confirming if it was alive, he immediately switched back. He initially thought it was all a dream, but was surprised to see that the demigod's body was lying right next to him. Once he got back into the other body, he wondered if he should call the cops for help. However, when he remembered all the torture he went through as a short and ugly fatso, he quickly had a change of mind, and decided to use this new body to make up for his awful past. The following morning, Daniel arrived at his new school, and everyone was blown away by his good looks. As he walked into the class and introduced himself, all the girls had their floodgates open. He took a seat at the back of the class and was shocked to discover that the girl from yesterday and her homicidal boyfriend were among his new classmates. Ha Nul came over to his seat and tried seducing him with her giant cannons, and among one of the girls who thought he was hot was Mai Jin. But the teacher yelled at Ha Nul to sit back down. She followed Daniel to the cafeteria, and Daniel revealed that he chose the fashion major because of the low grades he got at his former school. However, when Ha Nul asked his reason for choosing the major, he lied and said that he enjoyed doing fashion. Back in class, Daniel found it hard to concentrate because of the stress from the previous day, and he fell asleep halfway through the lecture. Suddenly, he switched back into his fatso body and immediately freaked out because of the fear of being discovered. He tried forcing himself back to sleep, but he was too refreshed from the long slumber to return to that state. Luckily, Hanul came over and scared him into waking up, saying that the class was over. He thanked her for saving him, and heaved a sigh of relief for escaping his nightmare body. Later that night, Daniel tried using his demigod charm to get a part-time job as a cashier at a local convenience store. His plan was to get the job for his fatso persona to work throughout the night, while his perfect body got the beauty sleep needed to remain handsome each morning. The manager was immediately convinced to employ Daniel, because he imagined how much money he would make from having such a handsome employee. However, his hopes were crushed when Daniel informed him that he was getting the job for a friend instead. After a few minutes, Daniel's fatso persona appeared. Seeing his fat, disgusting body, the manager was reluctant to employ him at first, but Daniel impressed him with his vast knowledge of cancer flavors, so he ended up securing the job instantly. For the first time in his life, he was finally going to be earning a living, and he was put in charge of the store for the night shifts. Just 5 fucking minutes later, Jin Seong and his crew walked in, trying to purchase a few bottles of piss. Jin Seong was about to let things slide with the fatso, but when he discovered that his name was the same as Mr. Steel Yo-Girl, he quickly lost his temper and punched him in the face, jumping behind the register stand and beating him until he was bloody. His friends took embarrassing pictures of Daniel's plot to prevent him from reporting them to the police, and they took off from the store. The next day at school, Daniel stood and watched as Jin Seong and his crew laughed at the naked pictures they took of his fatso persona. All of them praised Jin Seong for beating him up, and began saying that his mother was probably as disgusting as him. Unable to bear the indirect insults to him or his mom any longer, Daniel interrupted their conversation and told them not to use the fatso's mom in their jokes anymore. Jin Seong wasn't ready to take orders from the new kid, so he rose up and challenged him to a fight. He threw the first punch, but he was immediately held back by another classmate, Jae Yol, who was against fighting. However, Jin Seong broke out from his grip and threw another punch at Daniel's direction. This time though, Daniel tapped into his demigod abilities and dodged the second punch, along with all the others that Jin Seong threw at him. Daniel kept on dodging until Jin Seong pushed him against the lockers and launched a deadly blow towards his face. However, rather than dodging this time, Daniel stood his ground and blocked the punch, shocking everyone in class. He tried going in for another blow, but in that instant, Daniel remembered all the times that he had been bullied, and he channeled all his energy into one huge punch, bashing Jin Seong in the gut and forcing him to surrender. The crowd of students went wild with excitement, and they all hailed him for winning the fight. The news of his knockout punch got to the leaders of other departments, and they became agitated and determined to take him down. Later that night, a strange boy named Jin-ho quietly walked into the store and picked up a pack of licorice sticks. Daniel knew something was off, but when he invited him to the counter to pay, the boy rushed out of the building. As Daniel ran after him, he realized the potential consequences he would face if his boss found out about the incident. But when he finally reached the alley, he saw Jin Seong's friends. It was at that moment he knew he f***ed up, and that Jin-ho was just another victim of bullying. He begged them to pay for the pack of cigarettes, but they all laughed at him, and Hyun-do grabbed him by the shoulder, threatening to post more embarrassing pictures of him on the internet if he continued to ask for payment. As they tried making him fight with Jin-ho, a man called Basco interrupted their bullshit, grabbing Hyun-do by his neck and lifting him above the ground. He questioned the reason for his actions, shouting at the top of his voice, so Hyun-do begged him to let them go. They promised not to trouble the boys ever again, and after they left, Basco advised Daniel and Jin-ho to start working out in order to build their combat strength. The next day, Basco had stopped by the school cafeteria to see the new student everyone had been talking about. He found Daniel in the midst of the school's top bullies and decided to teach him a lesson, so he held Daniel by his shoulder and forcefully made him sit on a chair. However, to everyone's surprise, Daniel grabbed his hand and released Basco's grip from his shoulder. Basco was about to throw a punch at Daniel, but BAMJ intervened and stopped him, apologizing to Daniel as he escorted Basco away. When his friends were angry with BAME's intervention, he pointed at the redness on Basco's wrist, saying that Basco would have been the one to get knocked out. The 3 bullies from last night hurried over to Daniel and showered him with praise, begging him to be their friend. This was the first time in his life that he ever felt like someone wanted to be his friend, and Ha-Nul asked him to join them for a fun night of drinking grape juice, so Daniel decided to give it a try. That evening, Daniel joined Hyun-do and his company at their regular drinking spot, but when Jin Seong arrived, he was uncomfortable seeing him around them and decided to drink heavily. Ha Newell noticed Daniel was wearing an oversized shirt and asked him why, but Daniel was determined to keep his secrets hidden, so he lied that it belonged to his roommate. After a few minutes, Hyun-doo began making fun of the victims he had bullied and attempted showing Ha Newell some of their pictures on his phone, but Daniel grabbed it and crushed it with his hands, warning them to never bully other people. Having drank too much grape juice, he collapsed onto the table and realized he had accidentally woken up in his disgusting body, so he immediately ran to the grape juice party, lying to everyone that he was just bringing Daniel home for an errand. The following day, Daniel returned home from school and was surprised to find his mom waiting for him. Since she didn't know who he was, he introduced himself as Daniel's friend, but she wanted to know more about him and suggested they go out to eat. After arriving at a fine restaurant, she noticed Daniel's presence was drawing everyone's attention and wished her fatso son was here with them. After they talked about how their lives were going, she called the waiter over, asking if she could take the trash boxes with her. Seeing her collect all those boxes, Daniel realized that his mom has been collecting garbage just so that she could afford sending him to schooling. As she prepared to leave, she offered to give him some money for himself, but he didn't accept, saying he had enough with him. However, she continued insisting until he eventually took it. At that same time, Basco saw him taking the money and was extremely angry at Daniel for taking advantage of an old lady. So later that day, he confronted Daniel, telling him that he was about to teach him a lesson, and ignoring his attempts to resolve the situation, he charged forward, launching a punch towards him, but Daniel smoothly evaded the attack. Basco didn't stop, so he continued throwing punches and kicks, but Daniel narrowly dodged all of his attacks. However, one of his blows had landed on Daniel's face, causing him to question why he was being attacked. Basco demanded that he returns the money the old lady had given him, but Daniel refused and evaded another kick. However, Daniel's subsequent punch didn't do any damage to Basco, but as he remembered the moves he learned from Jai Seong, he charged towards him, expertly evading his punch, and with precision, he delivered a powerful blow with his elbow, leaving Basco unconscious. As he left, he asked Bayam-hee to take care of him. Later that night, Basco stopped by the store, and after seeing Fat Daniel, he told him to begin training in case he ever needed to use his muscles for combat. Daniel listened to his words and began doing push-ups, but all the Doritos he was eating tired him out, and he fell on his belly. As a young lady entered the store, she was impressed by his effort and bought him a drink, making him realize that he found the love of his life to simp over. So he swore to become a gym bro and to never give up on his goal of having a ripped body. The following day at school, Daniel rescued a fat student, Deok Pa, from being bullied and called a filthy pig, but everyone began to wonder why he wasn't supporting the bullies. Jae-yol was concerned about him and the rumors saying he was from a poor family, so he became determined to help him. At the convenience store, a girl with an endearing charm walked in and tried asking for Fatso's number, but he was too ashamed and said that he didn't have a phone. But she smiled and encouraged him to believe in himself, assuring him that he looks like a strong stallion.
Stop the cap! Stop the cap right now!
In the cafeteria, Deok Pa questioned why Daniel had invited him, saying he didn't have any money to pay for protection. However, Daniel told him he only desired to be friends with him because they were similar. But when he heard those words, Deok Pa became furious, suspecting he was being toyed with. Daniel had always looked very rich, so there was no reason he would settle for a loser like him. As Daniel walked home, he came across Jae-yol, who gave him a new set of clothes for his birthday. So after accepting it, Daniel discovered the clothes were worth a fortune, and soon noticed another gift at his doorstep. The following day, he walked into the class wearing his new designer brands, and all the students were stunned to see him, and began wondering how he could afford it. Later that day, Deok Pa was bullied again, and the bullies demanded that he gave them his McDonald's money. But since he didn't have any, they punched him in the stomach and tore his audition form for a talent show, commanding that he becomes their errand boy until he paid. As he delivered their meals, they called him a pig, hitting him on the head, and asking him to bring them water while running. But despite his efforts, they tripped him and asked him to go again. Having seen enough, Daniel stood up to defend him, so Jae-yol and Jin Seong followed him for support, all ready to take on the bullies. But another group appeared, ready to make it a three-way battle. However, Basco decided to also show up in the middle of this because he needed some showtime, and challenged Daniel to another fight. But he was stopped by the other group who were afraid of seeing him humiliated in the presence of all the students. Daniel blamed himself for Deok Pa's troubles and tried fixing the audition form, but as he gave it back, Diakpa confronted him for pretending to be a good person. He believed Daniel only did it to gain popularity, so he told him he wasn't a fool, and that the humiliation he faced only increased his passion for rap music, like his favorite singer, Eminem. As the days passed, Diakpa was beaten up by his bullies, who turned him to their punchback, demanding he quits the renowned talent show. He tried fighting back, but ended up losing his note of musical lyrics as they tore it to pieces before his eyes. Meanwhile, Daniel began showing interest in the show, and his friends encouraged him to participate. But he never wanted to go up in front of others, so he rejected the idea immediately. However, he continued to remember Diakpa's words about music, and remembered he loved singing too. As Diakpa came across him,
"Bruh, look at this dude."
He apologized to Daniel for his rudeness the other day, and after complimenting his voice, he advised that he sings on the show, and invited him to his home so he can test how deep his voice pipe can go.
Hell no, no.
However, he was worried that Daniel would see the shabby state of his house and consider him clumsy and dirty. But after arriving, Daniel volunteered to help him tidy up, and suggested switching off the lights to save on electricity bills. He began stacking up the newspapers scattered on the floor, and Diakpa realized that Daniel must have had a great upbringing, so Daniel told him his mom had taught him everything he knew. But he immediately apologized for doing too much, and admitted it wasn't his place to teach Diakpa how he should clean his own home. However, Diakpa assured him he did nothing wrong, so they began their musical practice. During the practice, Daniel began doubting his ability to sing, and wondered if he could really pull it off at the show. But Diakpa encouraged him and played a beautiful melody he had composed on his computer. Daniel recognized the tune, and was happy to hear it, saying he always sang it every time he felt sad and lonely. Diakpa was touched by his warm response and became motivated to work harder. After their practice, Diakpa was walking Daniel home when they came across his grandmother's food stall. So after Daniel introduced himself as Diakpa's friend, she told him her grandson had many friends, who were mostly unpleasant and nasty little shits that bullied him. This stirred up unhappy memories for Diakpa, reminding him of the dreadful things his classmates had done to her. As she offered Daniel food, he graciously declined. He understood the hardship she faced in her work, and had no desire to further add to her burden. The following day at school, Diakpa gave Daniel the lyrics to their song, hoping they can begin practicing for the show. So later that day, Diakpa told Daniel that he felt his emotion while he was singing. But little did he know that Daniel indeed understood his struggles, but could not tell his own secret to anyone. Diakpa reminded him they had only 2 weeks left to the show, but were still a long way in perfecting the song. So he advised him to shift his focus to learning the song until he could sing it perfectly from the heart. And so Daniel retired for the night, thinking about Diakpa's challenges and feeling sorry for him. While practicing at work the following day, Soo-young appeared before his eyes, complimenting his voice and offering him a pack of sweets that would help him in singing. Because of those magical sweets, Daniel began singing like a siren the next day, impressing Diakpa, who was unaware that Daniel had been practicing in another body. After several hours, Diakpa's bullies arrived and beat him up for practicing with Daniel. They tried to force his friend to hit him too, but he refused. Later that night, he and his friend visited Fatso at his workplace, apologizing for hitting him in the past. But Daniel told him he understood he was afraid of the bullies and forgave him. They began to share their experiences with bullies, and soon developed a unique bond. But when Diakpa began talking about Daniel's other persona, saying he was a new student that was kind to everyone, Basco walked into their conversation, wondering if that was really the truth. They told him that Daniel was actually a kind man, so he began feeling ashamed of himself, realizing that he was wrong about Daniel after all, so he told Fatso he could come by to train whenever he wanted. As days passed, Daniel and Diakpa continued to practice for the show, with Daniel improving every day. Meanwhile, at Ho Bin's studio, he plotted a scheme to ruin their experience at the show. So the day of the show finally arrived, and Daniel was feeling very anxious about his performance. But Diakpa encouraged him to stay calm and confident. Having spotted Soo-young, he rushed to greet her, but she took him for a perv, since she didn't recognize him in this other body. When Daniel tried to convince her that he had no bad intentions towards her, her bodyguard suddenly grabbed him, but he shook off his grip. The man perceived it as a hostile reaction and an invitation for a fight, so he launched a straight kick at Daniel. But he defended himself with his arms. However, it was a feint, as the man swiftly changed tactics and delivered a powerful side kick to Daniel's head, immediately knocking him to the ground, coughing. The guard prepared to deliver a finishing blow, but Soo-young urged him to stop, yet he refused, saying he was ordered to annihilate anyone who tried to touch her. But Basco arrived, calling himself Daniel's friend, and threatening to beat up the guard. In a split second, the man punched Basco in the face, but he remained unfazed despite being injured, demanding that the guard remove his glasses so they could fight fairly. But Soo-young stepped in before it escalated further, and eventually departed with him, leaving Basco and Daniel alone. Basco fell to his knees, groaning in pain, and realizing he wasn't strong enough to defeat the man in a fight. As they sat together, he offered Daniel a drink and apologized for their earlier misunderstandings. As the show finally began, Ho Bin took the stage for his performance, thrilling the crowd with his fantastic song. In the backstage, Daniel was very nervous, so Deokpa advised him to imagine singing for someone he deeply loved, telling him it would help in calming his nerves. After they appeared on the stage, the crowd was amazed by Daniel's appearance, but the host made fun of Deokpa, saying he looked like a completely different specimen, and that brought laughter from the audience. As it was finally time to sing, Daniel took a deep breath, gazing at the crowd, but he was shocked by his terrible sound. Ho Bin laughed at him, saying he sang like a goat, and the crowd's excitement began to wane. But Deokpa stepped up and took the microphone. He began delivering incredible lines that boosted Daniel's confidence, awakening his inner spirit, and leaving the audience awed by their amazing performance. At the end of the show, they were named winners, and Ho Bin couldn't help but recognize the differences in their talents. So his producer left him, offering to work with Daniel and giving out his business card, apologizing for not recognizing their talents during the audition. When Deokpa thanked him for his kind words, the man told him the opportunity was being offered to Daniel alone, saying he was too fat and ugly to work with. So Daniel declined the offer, unwilling to work with a man that acts like a total d***. Meanwhile, inside a mansion, Soo-young watched the talent show, wondering how Daniel knew the song she'd heard the fatso singing at the store. After the show, she looked at a fat girl sleeping by her side, her own body. Set your heart ablaze, go beyond your limits, and watch this next video.